Mama says namaste.
All right, I am back again this week with Jessica Connelly with Moon Daughters. And last week, if you have not gone to that episode, we talked all about cycle wisdom. And she shared a lot about the Moon Daughters course that is on cycle wisdom and really looking at how much we are connected to nature and to the seasons and the cycles and the moon and everything else. And so this week, we've now gone through in this 3-part series. We have talked about, Nathan and I have talked about just that process of how you talk about sex and sexuality in your house and when those conversations start. And then last week, going into the cycles and the seasons and how much we are connected to nature. And so this week, we're going to talk about a new course that's coming out. And I'm so thrilled I had the opportunity to go through it already. And I actually went through it, and my daughter, Clara, who's 13, sat there with me and went through the whole thing with me and listened to the whole course as well. And
awesome.
So I want to talk about that and just kind of go into some of the stuff that you address in there. So first off, if you want to just give a quick recap, any kind of insight of what all you are doing right now for those who might not have heard last week, and then introduce a little bit about what this course is and why you decided to add this course after Moon Daughters in the Cycle Wisdom course you guys just created.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me back again. I love, of course, these are my favorite topics. So for anyone that hasn't listened to the recording we did last week, I have 4 daughters. My oldest is also 13, and then I have a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and almost 4-year-old. Next week she turns 4. So this conversation about raising daughters and femininity and wisdom and all the things that we experience as women is just so present in my life all the time and at all of the different developmental stages. And so it's what I'm living and also what I want to be sharing with people, because I think it's so important. And I think we're living in a time where a lot of women are wanting this kind of like deep wisdom, honestly, combined with the modern science. So for those of you that were listening in last week, we talked a lot about the feminine cycle, right? Our menstrual cycle, but also how that connects to lots of other things, like Ashley was saying. And really the overall hope in that course is that women who want to invite their daughters into this, like, living out of feminine wisdom would really have a guide. And as I thought about that, and as I really got into the nitty-gritty day-to-day raising of my own daughters, it just became really clear to me that we can't really have a conversation about raising empowered daughters and raising daughters that love their bodies without like really diving into the sexuality question, right? Like it's just such like for most of us, it's kind of the elephant in the room. It's like it's often been a very taboo subject. The more and more women that I've worked with, and women who are then bringing questions about their daughters, there's so much question that we have about how to talk about it, when to talk about it, and I'm in that too. I have 4 daughters at different stages, and so those are questions that I have and that I've been living out. And so I partnered with a sex therapist who does this as a living and is an expert in the questions of sexuality. And we created a little course that is focused for each age group so that mothers can really have a like kind of meaty guide as into some of these questions from a very holistic perspective. Holistic meaning sexuality is about all of us, like body, mind, heart, spirit. It's not just this thing that turns on when you hit like 11 or 12 or 13 and now you have to like manage it so it doesn't harm you. Does that make sense?
Can you make a distinction there? Because oftentimes when we're thinking having conversations with our children, it's the birds and the bees talk. Like that's all, right? We don't have any other conversations about this. It's the birds and the bees
Right.
talk, this one little compartmentalized element. So when you're talking about sexuality, like what all do you see that it's encompassing beyond just that birds and the bees talk?
Yeah, such a great question, and one that like has totally transformed for me because I started out thinking that that's what it was about too. Like at some point you
Right,
have this talk and then your job's done and like good luck, right?
right.
um but really like as I've been in this world and done this work, I'm realizing that sexuality is a much bigger part of us than just like when you go through puberty and then,
Hmm.
your body changes and things change. Um, it actually starts like when we're in the womb. I mean, one thing that I've learned from Cherie, the sex therapist that I partnered with, was that, they're in the womb, babies are exploring their parts. We are born sexual beings. And so, um, it's really, this course is a shift in perspective from like, okay, here's how you have this one talk to how can we see sexuality growing in our daughters from the time they're little all the way up to that preteen, maybe pre-adolescent time where bodies do change and all of the things that we thought sexuality about, that does happen, but it starts so much earlier. And so the
Hmm.
and so the programming about sexuality, what we believe about sexuality, that starts a lot earlier too. And I think that's so important for us to know because there's different messages that we're sending in how we live our lives and how we react to
Hmm.
questions, and um, that then begins to form a story about sexuality for our daughters. And so being aware of that can help us then intentionally decide, well, what do I want my daughter's sexual story to be? Do I want it to
Hmm.
be, oh, we can't talk about that, or my body is bad, or you know, we get to be proactive in deciding that instead of just allowing these messages to come through. And then as an adult, all of us have the opportunity to decide how what our sexuality means, but there's usually a lot of unraveling to do at that point.
Well, that hits that hot button topic right there. um, just hearing when you started telling me about this, and we talked about it a little bit last week, just I think even before our interview time, and you were talking about sexual legacy. Just that
Mhm.
word, like leaving a sexual legacy, that can be um, that's a lot of weight to put into this, and we have to recognize whether we are intentional about it or not, we are creating a legacy of where our children are going with this and what stories they're writing. And that is something that I really loved about the course, was that you both handled this in such a gracious, empathetic manner of recognizing that a lot of us mamas are coming into this, mothers and fathers, and I'll use this as both because I know both people listen on this, and I know there are single dads that are navigating this and having to
Yeah.
have these conversations, and now they're even, having to have the conversations oftentimes maybe because the mother is not at a place to be able to do this and having
Mhm.
trauma. And so, I mean, recognizing this, and when you're carrying this shame or trauma or anything, or this baggage from your past, recognizing that that is something that can be a legacy that you pass on. You touched on that really well in the
Mhm.
in the course of just helping to see the importance of rewriting that story and recognizing that where you are, what pain you have does not need to be carried on. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
exactly.
so with that, yeah, how do you? I'm trying to think of what the next question is on
Well,
that.
well, let me
But
let me let me just let me just affirm what you said because I actually
okay.
also just love this concept of sexual legacy, and that's something that my collaborator Cherie Cott brought to this
Hmm.
through her work. And the idea is that again, like we are leaving a sexual legacy. We're leaving legacy all over the place, but we're also leaving a sexual legacy, and maybe we haven't really thought about what that is. And and just to be like, I mean, what a sexual legacy is the story that you're telling every day with your life and how you live about sexuality and what you believe about it, because we are all doing that. And we're doing that in the littlest moments of like, you know, when from the time our kids are little, they're going to explore their bodies. They're going to explore self-pleasure. They're going to ask questions. And depending on our experience as mothers and fathers, we're going to react a certain way. And there's so much grace for all of that, but it's just bringing awareness to the fact that we are telling a story. And just like so many of the things that you talk about, Ashley, we are in charge of that story. We're adults. Like, we can decide what kind of story we want to leave. And through this process of actually acknowledging that we are giving our daughters a sexual legacy, we can find healing ourselves. So it's a really beautiful cycle, actually, right? We can actually kind of go back to some of the wounding that we might have had and then realize, oh, that's where this is coming from. Like, I can actually just take a few deep breaths and then choose how I want to respond right now. For instance, we talk about in the 2 to 5 year old module, we talk about when our daughters discover their vulvas and they discover self-pleasure. And that is usually a trigger for a lot of people, because there's been a lot of stories around that and how we should handle that. And we give some tips about how in a gracious way, right? Because we're not perfect, and we are responding from like an automatic place, but we give some tips around actually preemptively understanding that there are going to be triggers, and then maybe like reorienting our beliefs about a certain thing. And actually normalizing it from the perspective of a sex therapist, like normalizing the fact that having a body is a good thing, that sexuality is a force for good in the world. And if we believe that is a core value, then we react out of that instead of like this automatic, like, oh no, don't do that. Right. One of the, another sex therapist that I follow, who is really amazing, talks about her specialty is sexual shame, Dr. Tina Shermer Sellers. And she talks about how sexual shame is our first shame. So as humanity, as people, we deal with shame, right? We all deal with it in some form. But sexual shame is our first shame. So that's the baby in the bathtub that finds their body parts, their vulva or their penis, and then immediately is shamed because somebody's sexual legacy told them that wasn't okay.
I mean, I think about that. That process of normalizing can be difficult. I mean, even to the point of like using correct terminology, that is a big deal. It is a big deal, and anybody in the anybody dealing with like sexual assault and any kind of sexual abuse or anything, especially with children. I mean, that's one of the first things they say is make sure you're teaching your children anatomically correct verbiage for what is being said. But how many of us, lower our voice and kind of whisper if we say vulva? That's a quiet word, right? We don't want to say this word. And
right.
Even for me, as much as I want to normalize this, I recognize that my first trigger response is that saying these certain body part words or quieter words and stuff. And it took a while for me to switch into, if they come up to me and say something about their breasts or something like that, that I can take that and it's a normal thing, and we can recognize that this is a normal body part. And I have to say that, this does not mean that even with you, Jess, and with Cherie, I mean, it's not like every single conversation is so perfectly well versed and there's never a hesitation. So how do you handle that? What happens when you have that trigger response of something from your history, something from you saying, no, and you're not fully there and your child throws you off? How do you handle that in a way that doesn't shame them, doesn't create that legacy, but you're not fully ready or you weren't in that moment? How can you kind of redeem that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just and to piggyback on that, I'm finding my limits all the time. My edges and my walls, like constantly I'm bumping up against them and going, "Oh." But I would say like the key for me and the key to that question is just that I've actually, like, I have the awareness and the intention to actually, like, to think for a minute and pause and link it back to what my core beliefs and values are, instead of that, like, kind of nervous system reactive place. So we, in the course, we talk about how if you know that there's certain triggers, they're going to come up from your history or from your upbringing or anything like that. um, Ahead of time, for instance, we have affirmations. Like, you can create an affirmation around this idea that your kids are sexual beings. They just are. Humans are sexual beings. And so these questions are going to come up. And so when you hit up against one of those edges, there's even the simplest affirmation of, like, sexuality is good. Um, you know, I choose for this to be a point of connection between my daughter and I. Right? So let's say she asks a question that is just triggering, or you notice that she has discovered that her vulva feels good when she touches it, or whatever it is. That might be really triggering, and you can go back to this mantra of, okay, I believe sexuality is good, and I want this to be a something that connects us deeper instead of separating us. So making an intention ahead of time before you're in that awkward moment with your own self is really important. But also, you can take a break, right? You can walk out and you can take a couple deep breaths and you can have your moment and just be like, okay, didn't expect for this to come up today, but here we are. Like, here we go. It doesn't have to be perfect. None of this is polished. We're all just figuring it out. But the more you bring it intention and awareness to this part of our lives that has so commonly been kind of shrouded in darkness and shame, that little by little you're letting the light in, and your reactions are going to change. They just are. I promise. It just works. You shed light on something and you go, oh, okay. I mean, the first step would probably just be not reacting and stepping out for a minute and taking a few deep breaths. And then going back to what you've decided you believed. Like, oh, sexuality is actually good. So if that's true, how would I respond from that place?
Yeah. And there's two things with that. First off, I love that. And there's the power in the pause. I mean, I use that whenever I'm doing my personality style, when I'm speaking on it in presentations, I talk about the power of the pause and how 7 seconds can make a huge difference. Counting to 7 before we respond is, if we were to take in the science of all the different styles and stuff, 7 seconds is about how long it'll take kind of everybody to kind of get up to that processing. But there is a portion of the world that works in 3-second pattern. We just keep on going. Every 3 seconds we're going. And so, you get asked a question. Well, I've got to immediately spit something out. Well, that whole think 3 times, speak only once is a really, really helpful thing. And so sometimes just pulling back and taking that moment to go, okay, what is my goal here? What's that affirmation that I need to remember? And then the other part is, I think that it's important for us, especially if we're coming in it with shame and trauma, to make sure that we're differentiating sexuality versus sexiness. I think sometimes we are looking at this as, wait, if I'm doing any of this stuff, what I'm doing is I'm promoting sexiness in my child. And how can you speak a little bit to that and that idea of, because I mean, even like, I know that, for my own upbringing, coming from a conservative Christian household, in the church, there are so many conversations about how sex is a taboo thing, and and masturbation is a sin, and you do not have sex before marriage. And the way that we do it is you avoid it and you don't discuss it and you don't have any conversation. You should never lust for somebody. And the instant you get married, then the light switch should turn on and you should be the sexy person completely ready to have all kinds of wonderful sex when you've never been able to
Right.
touch it before. So, so coming from that and knowing that there's so many people where we associate sexuality and everything else with sexiness. It's pornography, it's sleazy, it's sexy. How
Right.
can you,
Right.
what can you say about that distinction there?
Yeah. Well, I think that that's a really great question, and I think that like misunderstanding really runs deep in our culture, because
Mm-hmm.
you're right. Like we kind of just we we definitely have sort of crossed some wires in terms of how we understand sexuality and even how we understand sex. So I want to zoom out even from this idea of like a lot of people understand sex. So when you think about the sex talk, which actually we don't promote in this course, we don't think that there should be one talk. But when you do think of this idea of like if we're going to tell our daughters about sex, it's commonly understood that sex means intercourse, and even in like couples and relationships, most there's a lot of misunderstanding that sex is about. That's what it means. That's the definition. Penis vagina sex, essentially. And of course there's other kinds, but like intercourse is really how we've understood sex to be. But if you zoom out to this broader understanding of sex, and I love this definition, again coming from the sex therapist, is that sex is about connection and it's about pleasure. So when you're engaging with a partner in ways where you feel connected and pleasurable, that is under this wider holistic understanding of what sex is. And I think that speaks to what you're saying, because it just broadens this understanding of what it is. So let me give you another example of a kind of like, sort of developmental interaction with a daughter that we would consider to be holistic sexuality training. Again, and it doesn't have to do with sex or sexiness or anything like that, or genitals. This has to do with us as sexual beings. And this is an example that Cherie gave in the course. And I think her daughter was 8 or 9 at the time. And she met a new friend at school, little girlfriend, and they really connected. And she came home and she immediately was like, "Mom, I met this new friend and I want to have a sleepover. Can I sleep over at her house tonight?" And Cherie, who's the sex therapist, was had the awareness to know that this conversation that they were about to have was really about boundaries and was actually about sexuality. And so it was so beautiful, because what she ended up doing was having a talk with her daughter about like, "Oh yeah, that's so great. Like, I'm so glad you met this friend. And yes, you could totally have a sleepover. But before we sleep over at her house, why don't we plan a park date and we'll meet up at the park, and I can meet her mom and I can meet her and we can all like have a picnic. It'll be so fun, and then maybe she can go over to our house and then maybe you can go to her house." And, so it's not like, "Oh, hi, I met you. Let's have a sleepover with this, these two 8-year-old friends." It's like, there's an actual healthy way to interact and engage in human intimacy for everybody. And that is part of how you leave sexual legacy, is by training and teaching your daughter how to actually engage in intimacy with people, with other people. And eventually that might lead to that will be important in any sexual relationships that she has later, because she will have this bank of wisdom within her of like, "Oh, I know how to do friendships. I know how to actually move into intimacy with another person, whether it's sexual or not." But that's all a part of sexuality. So do you see how that sort of broadens this understanding of sexuality from like nakedness and, fooling around to like boundaries and intimacy and human connection and pleasure? Like, we need to teach our daughters that pleasure is okay, not just sexual pleasure, not just genital pleasure, but it's okay to enjoy a good meal. It's okay that you love a back rub. So all of these little ways that we interact and teach our daughters about connection and pleasure as they're, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then into the teenage years, that is all building an understanding of themselves as sexual beings and setting them up for safe, healthy relationships when they're older.
Oh, I love that so much. And I think, I mean, even for those of you with sons at home, I mean, we can still say the same thing if we're looking at sexuality as connection and pleasure. And then, like, yeah, if we take that as the big approach, and that's what it is, and that's the point of it, is connection and pleasure. And then we're looking at just completely non-sexual day-to-day life as opportunities for helping them to build relationships, understand what consent is, and respect for yourself and for others, and all of these other things. I absolutely love that, and that was that one example in the course definitely hit home with me too, where I was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about that. Like how quickly our young kids are like, will hop in the sack, essentially. They're going to hop in the bed with another kid they just met.
Yes.
And how much of an opportunity. And yes, we can understand the innocence of it. And especially, two little 8-year-old girls spending the night together can be a completely innocent thing and not have anything to do with it. However, what a incredible thing to set that precedent that I don't care who you are, I'm not immediately jumping in bed with you, because that's a very intimate aspect of a relationship and a friendship of any sort. And so I'm going to get to know you and build that relationship of respect and trust.
So one other thing that I wanted to mention, connected to the question that you asked, is that we all come to this conversation from many different backgrounds and many different belief systems. So I think it's really important to mention that we can have faith traditions, we can have belief systems, we can have cultural beliefs around sexuality. We can come to this conversation with our personal sacred beliefs, but we can also hold this understanding of openness and the possibility that we can actually connect deeper with our daughters through open conversations around sexuality. Does that make sense? Like, this doesn't exclude anybody or exclude any way that you might, any tradition that you might come from. But I think, even within that, we can all sort of like understand that there can be a paradigm shift to understanding that sexuality is good. I mean, I think any tradition that I know of actually agrees about that too. So it can be something that unifies us, and we can hold that truth, that this affirmation that I believe that I can actually connect deeper with my daughter through her growing sexuality.
And just understanding, I mean, going back to all of the aspects that we hit last week about it being such a natural thing. I mean, recognizing that our kids are seeing it in nature all the time. I mean, my daughter, we've got a game camera up at our new house here. And so she set up a game camera in the back, and we're right on an easement, and it happens to be a pretty popular place for animals to go by. And we've heard that there's a bobcat around. So we've had the game camera out, and last night, of course, of all things, what did she capture? 2 bunnies. And of course, they're making more bunnies. And she's like, oh my gosh, I think they're having sex right there. And she could see the whole thing on the game camera. And, they're seeing it constantly. And yet, what other animals have shame around it? And what other animals, is this something where it is such a taboo? I mean, it's such a natural thing, and you'll see animals do it no matter where they are, or even in the fact of pleasuring themselves. And you'll see animals that are doing that. And so they're seeing in nature all of these ways of animals having their sexuality and having pleasure within their own bodies and with others. And so if that's all around anyway, if this is not a matter of throw out any belief systems that you have, but we are saying pay attention to what trauma or what baggage or what shame you are carrying. And is that really a part of your belief system, or is that the part that you're hiding behind? And you might put that belief system up, but really this is more of a deeper issue of something that maybe you're wanting to process through. I think that you can still have you can still hold sacred your own values and beliefs in a way that still honors our bodies and honors and respects who we are, for sure.
100%. And I love your example about the bunnies, because that's exactly it. There's so many, when you start to open your eyes to sort of all of the opportunities to talk about sex, the 201-minute conversations about it, they're everywhere, because we are all sexual beings. There's so many opportunities to have short, lighthearted conversations. And over time, again, like over time, if the more you're willing to engage those conversations and engage questions in a really lighthearted way, that is creating a sexual story for your daughter. And it might be actually rewriting your own in the process.
Oh, I love it. This course it's broken up into different age brackets. And I love that. And even though I'm out of the 2 to 5 year old range, it was really powerful to go through them all just to see how each one builds and to get some insights into developmentally, what things may be opening up for kids and to kind of understand how to have those. I love that. I love that process and the openness and just the grace you have with it. And with all of your courses too, they're also a part of an online community, correct?
Yes. So the Cycle Wisdom course does have an online Facebook community, and we don't yet have a community built for the Sexual Legacy course, but I think that's forthcoming, and I'm actually open to what the needs are of the people that are going through that, and if that kind of community aspect is something that people are wanting. So I am open to feedback.
Awesome.
And I did want to mention too, and this is kind of circling back to what we said about, hey, what if you're coming to this conversation with triggers or baggage? Well, we all sort of are coming with baggage, but what if you know that this is going to be hard for you? And because that's part of the reason we broke it up into age modules. So if you have a 5-year-old and you're just starting to get questions where you're just like, oh my gosh, how do I answer these? How do I not react in a way that's going to shame her? Watching the modules ahead of you is going to be key, because if you can understand developmentally what's normal and what's coming, you can be so much better positioned to be able to move with her through the 6 to 9-year-old years and then the pre-adolescent years. So I think that's really a key part of this and a really helpful way to preemptively set yourself up for the kind of guidance that you want to give her.
And yeah, I'm likening that process of talking about sexuality with our children and creating that legacy, instead of looking at it as the birds and the bees talk, look at it like you do understanding language. I mean, understanding language starts in the womb. They're hearing sounds for the first time. In the womb, they're exploring their bodies for the first time. And then as they grow, they're overhearing and they're observing and they're seeing and they're soaking in so much. And then there comes a point that they start creating a voice for themselves and they start, exploring their own bodies and everything else. And then as that grows, your vocabulary grows and deepens over times, as do the questions and the complexity of your own sexuality. And so if we can shift our approach again back to looking at this more like learning the language of our lives as opposed to the one script that we have to go through,
memorized by a certain time.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Because I will tell you honestly, there are a lot of people that are waiting for that time to say that script. And by the time they're ready to do it, their children have already had that conversation with a lot of other people, or they've seen it online and they've figured this stuff out, or they've already maybe come up with their own stuff that is not exactly what you intended at all.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Totally. I completely agree. And, for those out there that maybe you're coming to this conversation for the first time and you have a 10-year-old and you're like, oh, geez, I wish I would have known this back when I had a 5-year-old. I just want to speak to that. There's so much possibility still. There's not anything missed. And like you said, you don't have 2 to 5-year-olds, but what we're talking about in this progression of this course is a mindset and it's a paradigm. So even if you have a 10-year-old, understanding that paradigm and how to approach sexuality in this holistic way, meaning meaning sexuality is about my mind, my heart, my body, my spirit. It's not just about my genitals.
Mm-hmm.
That will be very, very helpful. And there is so much time for you and your daughter to kind of learn together about what sexuality is. So I don't want this to exclude anybody. And there are like, age appropriate developmental details that are important. And so we do include some of those too. Like, here are some really helpful things to talk about. Make sure
Mm-hmm.
that you've talked about these things at this age. So I think it's good to speak to the mamas that have older ones that are, just jumping into this conversation too.
Yeah. And recognizing that those of you who have boys, this is still, I mean, every single one of us is impacted by a female in some way, shape, or form. We all have them. And whether you're going through this for your own process to go through to processing for your own stuff, I mean, even this one on leaving a sexual legacy, it can be so healing on just addressing your own shame around that, and is a great segue to go into the cycle wisdom as well, and going into that course. And so, but recognizing this, even if you have boys, you're getting insights into where are the girls that are surrounding them, where are the girls that they're hanging out with, or their peer group, where are they at developmentally? Because we know that our girls oftentimes are becoming more sexually mature at a faster age than a boy. And so recognizing that this is what's going on, it can still be so helpful. We're still having these conversations, even if you are the only woman in a house full of boys. This stuff is so relevant and very, very important in a house full of boys, that you are setting that example of how they treat a woman, and how they, how they address consent and respect and mutual respect, and for all genders, and for everyone. So there's so much power in this, not just for mothers of daughters, but I say women in general. I have found such merit in this, and I have recommended your courses even for some of my friends that do not have any children. I have recommended it for women just in general, because of the insights and the introspection and being able to go through it. And I know that you have had some males that have gone through it as well. So totally. I know, so it's definitely something where, as much as your focus is with mothers and daughters, sexuality is something that affects all of us, and every mother and daughter has a lot of males around just as much. That this is definitely something that can be a healing process, and a great boost to shift your mindset, to kind of help you with confidence on where to go from here.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, because of these larger concepts, right? These kind of paradigm shifts about how we even think about sexuality, how we even think about sex. I mean, that for sure, that applies to everybody. And then coming down to the details and the integrations and the little conversations, we focus on how to talk to girls, but these bigger concepts are huge, and they are really important.
Yeah. All right. So we are timing this so that you guys are getting this right at the launch of this course. So let us know, where can we go? What's the official name of the course, and where can we go and get more info?
Yeah. So the name of the course is Creating Sexual Legacy. And you can just go straight to moondaughters.com, and there will be a link to this course. And it will be offered at a discounted price during this week, since we're super excited about sharing it with the world for the first time. And Ashley is even going to offer you a code, which is Namaste. And we just love her so much, and we love this community so much that we're going to offer 25% off. So follow the links on moondaughters.com, enter your code Namaste, get your 25% off, and you're in. You've got it.
That's awesome. So moondaughters.com. And then if you enter in the code Namaste, and if you don't know how to spell Namaste, look at this website or look at the podcast, because it's in the name. You should know this one. So, namaste, or as some people in the South go, namaste. You can enter in this code. I've had a few people, like customer service people, say, namaste, what's that? So,
That's so
put
great.
in the code namaste. I will put a link with my backstory on what namaste means to me. I'm going to put that in this one as well, so people can see that. But I will have in the show notes here, obviously the full video is up on YouTube, so you can see this video as well as listening to it on the Mama Says Namaste podcast. Use that coupon code, especially with this launch. I am excited to cheer you on, Jess, and all you're doing and help to spread the word. I love both of these courses. And if you have not listened to the whole 3-part series, make sure you go back and listen through all 3. The first one, Nathan and I discuss what all we've done in our household. And I have a lot of book recommendations in the first one. And a bunch of those are either recommended by Jess, or we found out that we've used the same books. So there's a bunch in there as well. So we have resources in there. So go ahead and take in this whole 3-part series. And we want to hear from you what questions you have, what sort of feedback you have, any kind of response that you have on this process, and maybe what lessons you might have learned or what you were able to take into your home. So thank you so much for being a part of this series, Jess. I so value you and your wisdom and the people that you have brought in as part of these courses as well. So remember all that we are beautiful beings, and we have the ability to, this life is happening regardless of whether we're driving or not. So take this as your moment to say what type of life you want to live and what type of legacy you want to leave for your children, and how are you being intentional about that? Mm-hmm. This isn't about what's happened in your past, but where are you going to choose to move forward with your family, and what resources can you have to help support you along the way? So the more we understand about ourselves, the more we can recognize how the uniqueness in each of us strengthens all of us. Namaste. Thanks,
Namaste.
Jeff.
Thank you.
Up with the rising sun, already on the run. Mama says namaste. Life is a tangled mess, and you don't have to stress. Mama says namaste. 'Cause today I will stand up and be all the change that I want to see in this world. Boys and girls, you gotta have to stand up to be free. Namaste in your home. Take a deep breath in and let's start a brand new day. With Mama Says Namaste.